I was staring at my wife's iPad when my entire world collapsed into a single text message. Last night was incredible. When can we do it again? The message sat there on the screen, glowing in the darkness of our bedroom at 2:47 a.m. I'd only picked up the tablet to check tomorrow's weather forecast because my phone was charging downstairs. Instead, I found myself reading words that would detonate my 12-year marriage like a bomb. My wife, Jessica, lay sleeping peacefully beside me, her blonde hair splayed across the pillow, completely unaware that I'd just discovered her secret. The sender's name made my stomach drop. Kyle Patterson. My business partner. The man I'd known since college. The guy who'd been best man at our wedding. My hands started shaking as I scrolled up through the conversation. 3 months of messages, hundreds of them. Plans to meet at hotels, complaints about me, about how boring I'd become, how focused on work, how I didn't excite her anymore. Kyle's responses were worse, encouraging her, telling her she deserved better, that she deserved him. The most recent exchange was from earlier that evening, while I'd been in the garage organizing tools. They'd apparently met that afternoon at the Riverside Inn, just 20 minutes from our house in suburban Atlanta, while our 2 daughters were at soccer practice. Jessica had told me she was getting her hair done. I looked at her sleeping form, this woman I'd built a life with, and felt nothing but ice spreading through my chest. No tears, no dramatic emotional breakdown, just cold, crystalline clarity. I was a patent attorney specializing in intellectual property law. My entire career was built on documentation, evidence, and strategic thinking. As I sat there in the darkness, my mind wasn't racing with heartbreak. It was calculating, planning. Because if there was one thing I knew how to do, it was build an airtight case. Carefully, methodically, I started taking screenshots, every single message. I uploaded them to a secure cloud account Jessica didn't know existed. Then I went through her photo gallery. More evidence. Pictures of them together at restaurants I'd never been to, selfies in hotel rooms, images that made my jaw clench but my resolve harden. An hour later, I'd documented everything. I placed the iPad back exactly where I'd found it, returned to my side of the bed, and lay there staring at the ceiling. Jessica's breathing remained steady, peaceful, oblivious. My daughters, Emma, age 10, and Sophie, age 8, were asleep down the hall, completely unaware that their mother was destroying our family. That thought was the only thing that pierced through my cold fury. Whatever happened next, I had to protect them. By the time dawn broke, I'd formulated a plan. I got up at my usual time, showered, dressed in my typical work attire, navy suit, white shirt, conservative tie. I made breakfast for the girls like I did every morning. Jessica came downstairs at 7:15, wearing her yoga pants and a tank top, kissed me on the cheek with those lying lips, and asked how I'd slept. "Great," I said, handing her a cup of coffee. "Really great." She smiled at me, that same smile I'd fallen in love with 13 years ago, and I felt absolutely nothing. "I've got that early meeting today," I reminded her, though I'd just invented it 30 seconds ago. "Might be home late?" "No problem," she said, scrolling through her phone, probably texting Kyle. "I've got book club tonight anyway." Book club. Right. I wondered what else she'd been lying about. I kissed my daughters goodbye, grabbed my briefcase, and drove to my office in downtown Atlanta. But I didn't go to work. Instead, I drove straight to the office of Thomas Whitaker, a divorce attorney whose reputation in Georgia family law was legendary. We'd worked together on a case 2 years ago where I'd provided expert testimony on intellectual property valuation. He was ruthless, brilliant, and expensive. His secretary tried to tell me he was booked solid, but I told her to tell him Ryan Mitchell was here with an emergency. 5 minutes later, I was sitting in his corner office overlooking Peachtree Street. "Ryan," Thomas said, shaking my hand. He was in his late 50s, silver-haired, with the sharp eyes of a man who'd seen every dirty trick in the book. "What brings you here at 8 in the morning without an appointment?" "My wife is having an affair with my business partner," I said flatly. "I have documented evidence. I need to file for divorce and I need to destroy both of them." Thomas's eyebrows rose slightly. "That's direct. Tell me everything." I spent the next hour laying out the situation. I showed him the screenshots, explained the business structure of the patent law firm Kyle and I owned together, detailed our financial situation, our assets, our children. Thomas listened without interrupting, occasionally taking notes on his legal pad. When I finished, he leaned back in his leather chair and steepled his fingers. "Georgia is a no-fault divorce state," he began, "but adultery can still impact alimony and asset division. With this level of documentation, we can build a strong case. The business partnership complicates things, but it also gives us leverage. How do you want to proceed?" "I want full custody of my daughters," I said. "I want the house. I want her to get as little as possible. And I want Kyle out of the business we built together." Thomas nodded slowly. "All achievable, but we need to be strategic. If you tip your hand too early, they'll lawyer up and start hiding assets. We need to move fast but smart." "Tell me what to do," I said. And that's when Thomas Whitaker smiled. The smile of a predator who'd just spotted wounded prey. The parking pass was tucked behind registration papers and an old insurance card. Blue and white, laminated, with a magnetic strip on the back. Executive Plaza, 1247 Riverside Boulevard. I stood in our garage, holding Jessica's car registration in one hand and the pass in the other. She'd asked me to grab the registration for her, something about updating our insurance policy. A simple errand. 30 seconds in the glove compartment. The pass had a date printed in small text along the bottom. Valid from 09/15/2022. 2 years. She'd had access to this building for 2 years. I pulled out my phone and searched the address. Executive Plaza was a mixed-use development on the far side of Atlanta. 40 minutes from our house in good traffic, an hour during rush hour. The website showed a sleek glass tower with ground-floor retail, restaurants, and upper floors of professional offices and serviced apartments. Serviced apartments. My jaw clenched so hard I felt the muscle jump. Jessica didn't work anywhere near Riverside Boulevard. Her interior design work was mostly residential, with clients scattered across the northern suburbs. She had a small office she rented in a shared workspace 10 minutes from our house, a place I'd been to dozens of times, where I'd dropped off lunch or picked her up for dinner. I photographed the parking pass from both sides, making sure the date was clearly visible. Then I searched my phone for the screenshots from 3 nights ago, scrolling through the text messages between Jessica and Kyle until I found what I was looking for. "Tomorrow, same place, 2 p.m. Perfect. I'll be there by 1:45. The timestamp was from 6 weeks ago. I checked another exchange from 2 months before that. "Can you get away Thursday?" "Yes. Afternoon works." "I'll text you the unit number." Unit number, not hotel room, unit. I stood perfectly still in the garage, the pieces assembling themselves with brutal clarity. They weren't meeting at hotels. Or not just hotels. Kyle had access to one of those serviced apartments, probably through his real estate investments, the ones he'd been bragging about at the firm for the past 2 years. Corporate housing, he'd called it. Great for out-of-town clients, business meetings, temporary accommodations. Great for an affair that had been going on far longer than 3 months. The registration papers crumpled slightly in my grip. I forced my hand to relax, smoothed them out, and placed them back in the glove compartment. The parking pass went into my jacket pocket. Inside, Jessica was in the kitchen making coffee. I could hear the grinder running, the familiar domestic soundtrack of a Saturday morning. Emma and Sophie were still asleep. It was barely 8 o'clock, early for a weekend. "Did you find it?" Jessica called out as I came through the door from the garage. Got it. I held up my phone, where I'd photographed the registration before discovering the pass. Sent you a picture. Thanks, honey. She smiled at me over her coffee mug, her hair pulled back in a loose ponytail, wearing yoga pants and one of my old college sweatshirts. She looked relaxed, comfortable, completely at ease. I felt nothing. That same crystalline emptiness that had settled over me 3 nights ago when I'd first seen Kyle's messages. I'm going to run some errands, I said. Need anything? Maybe grab milk? We're almost out. Sure. I kissed her cheek, brief, routine, and headed for my car. The drive to Executive Plaza took 53 minutes. Saturday morning traffic was lighter than I'd expected, and I made good time once I hit the highway. The building was exactly as advertised: modern glass and steel, with a parking garage beneath and retail spaces at street level. A coffee shop, a bistro, a high-end gym. I pulled into the garage and stopped at the entrance gate. A card reader blinked red, waiting. The parking pass from Jessica's glove compartment slid smoothly into the reader. The light turned green. The gate lifted. Level P2, the system directed me. I followed the arrows down, past rows of expensive sedans and SUVs, until I found a visitor spot near the elevators. The pass had granted me access without question, without any verification or security check. Because it was registered to this location. Because Jessica had been coming here regularly enough to need permanent parking access. The elevator lobby was quiet, expensive-looking. Marble floors, brushed steel fixtures, a directory listing businesses and residences. Floors 1 through 5 were commercial. Law offices, consulting firms, a wealth management company. Floors 6 through 12 were listed simply as private residences. I took a photo of the directory, then another of the security camera positioned above the elevator doors. Modern building, good security. That meant records, access logs, surveillance footage. My phone buzzed. Jessica. Don't forget the milk, followed by a smiley face emoji. I stared at the message for 3 seconds, then pocketed my phone without responding. A door opened down the hallway, not the elevator, but a glass door marked Building Management. A woman in her 30s emerged, carrying a tablet and looking harried. Excuse me, I said, walking toward her. I'm hoping you can help me. I'm trying to reach someone who has a unit here, but I seem to have lost the apartment number. She looked up, professionally pleasant. I'm sorry, sir, but I can't give out resident information. Privacy policy. If you have their name, you could call them directly or use the intercom system in the lobby. I nodded, expected that. I understand. Actually, I'm an attorney, and I'm working on a case that involves this property. Would it be possible to speak with your property manager about access to parking records? Her expression shifted slightly, still professional but more guarded. That would be something you'd need to discuss with our legal department. Do you have a subpoena? Not yet. I'm in the preliminary investigation phase, but I wanted to introduce myself and understand your record-keeping procedures before we formalize the request. I pulled out my business card. Ryan Mitchell, patent attorney, though the specialty didn't matter for this conversation. Is there someone I could speak with about your security systems and access logs? She took the card, glanced at it. I can have our property manager call you Monday. We maintain detailed records of all building access, including parking and elevator usage, but we require proper legal documentation before releasing any information. How long do you retain those records? 3 years for digital access logs. Surveillance footage is kept for 90 days unless there's an incident requiring longer retention. 3 years. Long enough. Thank you, I said. I'd appreciate that call on Monday. Back in my car, I sat in the parking space and made notes on my phone. Date and time of visit. Conversation with building management. confirmation of record retention policies, the parking pass photo, everything documented, everything preserved. Then I called Thomas Whitaker. He answered on the second ring. Ryan, didn't expect to hear from you on a Saturday. I found something. A parking pass in my wife's car for a building across town. It's been active for 2 years. Silence on the other end, but I could almost hear him thinking. What kind of building? Mixed use, commercial and residential, serviced apartments on the upper floors. And she has no legitimate reason to be there? None. Her work is entirely residential design in the northern suburbs. This is 40 minutes south, completely out of her area. You're thinking your business partner has a place there. I'm certain of it. The text messages referenced unit numbers and meeting times. I think they've been using a serviced apartment, not hotels. More privacy, less paper trail. Except for the parking pass. Thomas's voice carried a note of satisfaction, which establishes a pattern of regular access over an extended period. Exactly. And the building maintains detailed access logs, parking, elevators, everything. 3 years of digital records. We'll need a subpoena for those records, but that's straightforward once we file. This is good, Ryan. Very good. It establishes premeditation and extended deception. A 3-month affair is one thing. 2 years of maintaining secret access to a location specifically for the purpose of conducting an affair, that demonstrates a calculated, ongoing betrayal. I watched a BMW pull into a space 3 rows over. A man in his 50s got out, carrying grocery bags, and headed for the elevator. Normal Saturday errands. Normal life. There's something else, I said. If Kyle owns or leases that apartment, it's a business asset, real estate holding, which means it's relevant to your partnership dissolution, Thomas finished. If he's been using company resources or business investments to facilitate an affair with your wife, that's a conflict of interest. Potential grounds for forcing a buyout on unfavorable terms. That was my thinking. I'll start drafting the subpoena request for Monday. In the meantime, do not confront your wife about this. Do not let her know you've been to this building. We want her completely unaware until we're ready to move. Understood. How are you holding up? The question caught me off guard. Thomas wasn't given to personal inquiries. I'm fine, I said. Focused. Good. Channel that focus. We're building an airtight case piece by piece. This parking pass is another nail. After we hung up, I sat in the car for another 10 minutes, staring at the elevator doors through my windshield. Somewhere up there, on one of those residential floors, was a unit where my wife and my business partner had been meeting for 2 years, where they'd built a separate life, a secret world. While I worked late at the office and coached Sophie's soccer team and believed everything was fine. My phone buzzed again. Jessica. Also, we need eggs. And maybe some bagels for tomorrow? I started the car and backed out of the space, the parking pass still in my jacket pocket. Evidence, documentation, another piece of the puzzle. I stopped at the grocery store on the way home and bought milk, eggs, and bagels. When I walked into the kitchen 20 minutes later, Jessica looked up from her laptop and smiled. You're the best. Thank you. No problem, I said, and started putting groceries away while she returned to whatever she was working on. Just another normal Saturday morning. The security manager's office smelled like burnt coffee and printer toner. Gerald Simmons, 50s, ex-military bearing, precisely trimmed mustache, pulled up the access logs on his computer while I sat across from him in a chair that had seen better decades. 2 years of data, he said, clicking through screens. You said the pass number was P1847? That's correct. His fingers moved across the keyboard with surprising speed. Here we go. First use was September 12, 2022. Tuesday afternoon, 2:17 p.m. I pulled out my phone and opened the calendar app, scrolling back. September 12, 2022. Jessica had told me she was meeting a potential client in Buckhead that day, a couple renovating a historic home. She'd come back with fabric samples and paint chips, talking enthusiastically about crown molding and original hardwood floors. How frequently was it used? I asked. Gerald's eyes scanned the screen. Pretty regular pattern. Tuesdays and Thursdays mostly, some Wednesdays, occasional weekend entries. He leaned closer to the monitor. Looks like averaging 8 to 10 times per month. 8 to 10 times per month. For 2 years. That was nearly 200 visits. The 3 months of text messages weren't the beginning. They were just when Jessica and Kyle had gotten careless enough to leave a digital trail I could find. Can you print those logs? I kept my voice level, professional. I can give you the last 3 months without a subpoena. Anything older, you'll need a court order. 3 months is a start. He hit print, and somewhere down the hall, a machine whirred to life. The apartment is 4C, leased under a corporate entity, Patterson Holdings LLC. Kyle's company, the one he'd set up for real estate investments 3 years ago. I'd reviewed the paperwork myself, helped him structure it properly for tax purposes. He'd been planning this. Not just the affair, the infrastructure for the affair. A dedicated space, corporate ownership to obscure the paper trail, parking passes that wouldn't show up on personal credit cards. This wasn't passion. It was premeditation. Gerald returned with a stack of papers, the printer ink still warm. Access logs for the past 90 days. You'll see entry and exit times, which elevator was used, duration of stay. I scanned the first page. Tuesday, 2 weeks ago. Entry at 1:43 p.m., exit at 4:22 p.m., nearly 3 hours. Jessica had told me she was at a tile showroom in Marietta that afternoon. She'd texted me a photo of mosaic samples. I flipped through more pages. The pattern was consistent. Afternoon visits, usually 2 to 4 hours. Always on days when the girls were at school, when I was at the office buried in patent applications and client meetings. What about surveillance footage? I asked. We keep 90 days on the main server. Lobby cameras, elevator cameras, hallway cameras on each floor. I can have IT burn it to a drive, but, again, you'll need that court order to make it official. How long would that take? IT guy's here until 6. If you can get me the paperwork today, I can have it ready tomorrow morning. I checked my watch. 4:35 p.m. Thomas Whitaker's office would still be open. I'll make some calls, I said. Thomas listened without interrupting while I laid out what I'd found. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled beneath his chin. 2 years changes everything, he said. This isn't a brief affair. It's a sustained parallel relationship, and the corporate apartment adds a financial dimension we can exploit. How? If Kyle used business resources to facilitate an affair with his partner's wife, that's a breach of fiduciary duty. We can argue for dissolution of the partnership with cause, which means you keep the firm and he gets bought out at a reduced valuation. How reduced? Depends on what the partnership agreement says, but typically 30 to 50% below market value in cases of breach. And if he used any firm resources, computers, phones, administrative staff, to manage this apartment or communicate with Jessica, we have grounds for additional claims. I thought about our shared server, the firm's email system, the administrative assistant who handled Kyle's calendar. I'll need access to firm records, I said. Not yet. If you start pulling files now, he might notice. We wait until we have the court orders in place, then we execute everything simultaneously. Divorce filing, partnership dissolution, discovery requests, all at once, before he can hide anything. What about the surveillance footage? Thomas picked up his phone. I'll have my clerk draft a motion for preservation of evidence. Judge Brennan owes me a favor. I can get it signed tonight. The building will have to preserve all footage and access logs pending litigation. And getting copies? That'll take a formal discovery request once we file, But preservation is the critical piece. We make sure the evidence doesn't disappear. He started typing on his computer, pulling up documents. I'm also going to recommend we hire a forensic accountant. If this apartment has been running for 2 years, there's a money trail. Corporate expenses, utility payments, maybe furniture or renovations. If any of it traces back to marital assets or the business, that's leverage. How long will all this take? The preservation order I can have tonight. The forensic accountant can start preliminary work immediately. Public records, corporate filings, that sort of thing. The deeper dive happens after we file and get discovery access. He looked up from his screen. We're talking 2 to 3 weeks before everything's in place. 2 to 3 weeks of pretending. Of breakfast conversations and goodnight kisses and asking about her day. Of sitting across from Kyle in partner meetings, discussing client strategies and billable hours. I can manage that, I said. You're sure? Because if you slip, if she suspects anything, she'll start moving money, deleting files, coordinating with Kyle. We lose the advantage. I thought about Jessica that morning, humming while she made coffee, asking if I'd pick up groceries, completely comfortable in her deception, confident in her secret. I'm sure, I said. I stopped at the grocery store on the way home, just like Jessica had asked. Milk, bread, chicken breasts, the specific brand of pasta sauce she preferred. I moved through the aisles on autopilot, my mind sorting through timelines and evidence. September 2022. That was when Emma had started 4th grade, when Sophie was beginning 2nd. Jessica had joined that book club around the same time, or at least that's when she'd started going out Tuesday and Thursday evenings. Book club. 2 years of Tuesday and Thursday book clubs. I grabbed a box of the girls' favorite cereal and added it to the cart. At the checkout, my phone buzzed. Thomas. Preservation order signed. Building management served electronically. All footage and logs frozen as of 6:47 p.m. I typed back, received. Thank you. The cashier, a kid barely out of high school, scanned my items with practiced efficiency. Find everything okay? Yes, thank you. Your total is $43.62. I handed him my card, watched him swipe it. $43 for groceries. Kyle was paying what, $2,000-$3,000 a month for that apartment? Plus parking, utilities, probably furniture and amenities. The receipt printed. The kid handed it to me with a smile that was probably required by his employee handbook. Have a great evening. You too. Jessica was in the kitchen when I got home, chopping vegetables for dinner. She looked up when I entered, smiled warmly. You're a lifesaver. I completely forgot we were out of milk. I set the bags on the counter. No problem. Traffic wasn't bad. She kissed my cheek. Casual, domestic, the kind of kiss that meant nothing and everything. How was your day? Busy. Client meeting ran long, then some administrative stuff. Kyle mentioned you two might need to hire another associate soon. Kyle mentioned. Like they'd had a casual conversation, colleague to colleague, not lover to lover in a corporate apartment downtown. We've been discussing it, I said. I started unpacking groceries, putting items away in their designated spots. Milk in the fridge, bread in the pantry, cereal in the cabinet above the microwave. Every item in its place, everything organized and normal. Jessica returned to her vegetables, the knife making rhythmic sounds against the cutting board. Oh, book club is tomorrow night. We're finally finishing that novel we've been working through. Which one was that? The historical fiction, about the woman in World War II. She didn't miss a beat, the lie flowing smoothly. It's been really good, but it's taking us forever to get through it. Tomorrow was Thursday. According to the access logs, she'd been at Executive Plaza last Thursday from 2:15 to 5:40 p.m. What time will you be home? I asked. Probably around 9. We usually go to dinner after. Dinner. I wondered if that part was true, or if she went straight to the apartment. If Kyle met her there, or if she went alone sometimes, treating it like her own private space. Sounds nice, I said. Upstairs, I could hear the girls playing in Sophie's room, their voices bright with laughter. Emma was helping her sister with homework, their routine as familiar as breathing. Jessica glanced toward the sound, her expression softening. They're so sweet together lately. They are. She turned back to her cutting board, and I watched her hands move with practiced efficiency. The same hands that had touched Kyle, that had probably decorated that apartment, that wore the wedding ring I'd placed there 12 years ago. 3 weeks. Thomas said 3 weeks until everything was ready. I could wait 3 weeks. I'd already waited 2 years without knowing. 3 more weeks would be easy. The preservation order came through on a Thursday afternoon. Thomas called me at the office, his voice carrying that particular satisfaction attorneys get when paperwork lands exactly as planned. Building management wasn't happy, but they'll comply, he said. All surveillance footage from the lobby, elevators, and fourth-floor corridor for the past 2 years is now protected evidence. They can't delete, overwrite, or accidentally lose anything. I leaned back in my chair, phone pressed to my ear. And the access logs? Electronic records are preserved. We'll get copies during discovery. The building uses a keycard system. Every entry and exit is time-stamped. He paused. Ryan, this is going to be thorough. Dates, times, duration of visits, a complete timeline. 200 visits. The number had been haunting me since we'd discovered it. 200 times Jessica had driven across town, parked in that garage, taken the elevator to the 4th floor, and walked into Kyle's apartment. 200 times she'd lied about where she was going. What about the forensic accountant? I asked. Meeting with her tomorrow, bringing all the partnership documents you sent over. She'll trace every dollar that went into Patterson Holdings in that apartment lease. After we hung up, I sat in my office staring at the Atlanta skyline. 15 floors below, people moved through their ordinary Thursday afternoons. Meetings, coffee breaks, mundane conversations about weekend plans. The normal world I'd been pretending to inhabit for the past week. My phone buzzed. Jessica. Running late. Can you pick up the girls from school? I typed back immediately. No problem. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Thank you. Book club tonight, remember? I'll be home around 10. My jaw clenched. Book club. The lie was so casual, so automatic. I wondered if she even felt the deception anymore, or if it had become just another part of her routine. Drive to Executive Plaza, park in the garage, take the elevator to 4C, spend 3 hours with Kyle, drive home, kiss the girls goodnight. Have fun, I typed. I picked up Emma and Sophie at 3:15. They tumbled into the car with their usual chaos, backpacks, art projects, a running argument about whose turn it was to pick the music. Dad, tell Sophie that Mrs. Palmer said my drawing was the most creative, Emma insisted. She said it was interesting, Sophie countered. That's not the same thing. Girls. I adjusted the rearview mirror to see them both. I'm sure Mrs. Palmer thought both your drawings were great. They settled into a truce, and Sophie won the music battle. Taylor Swift filled the car as I drove toward home, listening to them sing off-key in the back seat. These moments, ordinary, chaotic, precious, were what I was fighting for. Not the house or the assets or even my pride. Just this. The right to be their father every day, not every other weekend. At home, I made them snacks while they spread homework across the kitchen table. Jessica arrived at 5:30, already dressed for her book club, in dark jeans and a fitted sweater I'd bought her for Christmas. She kissed both girls, grabbed her purse, and paused by the door. Don't wait up, she said, smiling at me. You know how Linda gets when we start talking about the book? Linda. I wondered if Linda was even real, or just another fabricated detail in the elaborate story Jessica had constructed. Another question for the discovery process. "Drive safe," I said. She left. I heard her car start, listened to it back out of the driveway. 15 minutes later, I pulled up the Find My iPhone app on my iPad, the family account we'd set up years ago for safety, to track the girls' devices. Jessica's phone showed as a blue dot moving steadily east across the city. I watched it travel the familiar route. Highway 85 to the connector. Exit onto Piedmont. The dot slowed, then stopped in the exact location I'd memorized. Executive Plaza's parking garage. Emma looked up from her math homework. "Dad, you okay?" I closed the iPad. "Fine, sweetheart. Just checking something for work." By 8:30, both girls were in bed. I sat in the living room with my laptop, reviewing the documents Thomas had sent over. The forensic accountant, Patricia Brennan, 43, formerly with the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit, had already begun her preliminary analysis. Her initial notes were attached. Patterson Holdings, LLC, formed August 2022. Single-member entity, Kyle Patterson as managing member. Apartment lease signed September 2022. Monthly rent, $3,200. Total paid over 24 months, $76,800. Initial funding source requires deeper investigation. Wire transfer of $85,000 from Patterson personal account to LLC operating account. August 15, 2022. Origin of those funds, EF. Note: timing coincides with firm's settlement of the TechVision patent case. Partnership distribution that quarter was $340,000, split equally between partners. I read that last line 3 times. The TechVision case. I remembered it clearly. 18 months of work, a massive settlement, our biggest win that year. Kyle and I had each taken home $170,000 after taxes and expenses. He'd used his share to set up the apartment where he'd been sleeping with my wife. My phone buzzed at 9:40. Jessica's dot was moving again, heading west. She'd be home in 20 minutes. I closed the laptop and went upstairs. Brushed my teeth. Changed into sweatpants and a t-shirt. Got into bed with a book I had no intention of reading. When I heard the garage door open at 10:05, I was the picture of a man who'd spent a quiet evening at home. Jessica came into the bedroom, dropping her purse on the dresser. "Girls asleep?" "Since 8:30. "Good." She disappeared into the bathroom. I heard water running, the familiar sounds of her nighttime routine. When she emerged, she was wearing the blue pajamas I'd seen 100 times. She slid into bed beside me, smelling of the expensive soap we kept in the guest bathroom. "How was book club?" I asked, not looking up from my book. "Good. We're reading this thriller about a woman who discovers her husband has a secret family." She laughed. "It's completely ridiculous, but Linda loves it." The irony was so thick I could taste it. A thriller about deception, discussed during an evening spent with her lover, recounted to the husband she was betraying. I wondered if she appreciated the layers of her own lie, or if she was too deep in it to notice any more. "Sounds interesting," I said. She settled against her pillow, reaching for her own book. We read in silence for 20 minutes, a married couple's ordinary Thursday night. Comfortable, familiar, completely hollow. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text from Thomas, sent to my personal cell rather than my work number. "Forensic accountant found something. Call me tomorrow morning, early." I set the phone down carefully, keeping my expression neutral. Beside me, Jessica turned a page in her book, completely unaware that the evidence was mounting. That every lie was being documented. That the life she thought she was maintaining was already over. She just didn't know it yet. "I'm exhausted," she said, closing her book. "Long day. Get some sleep." She turned off her lamp, rolled onto her side, facing away from me. Within minutes, her breathing deepened into the rhythm of sleep. I stayed awake, staring at the ceiling in the darkness. Somewhere across town, Kyle was probably sleeping too. Maybe thinking about tomorrow's meeting with Jessica. Maybe planning their next book club night. Maybe believing that the secret apartment and the careful scheduling and the corporate entity shielding the lease meant they were safe. They had no idea what was coming. Patricia Brennan had found something. Something important enough for Thomas to text me at 10:30 on a Thursday night. Something that would add to the mountain of evidence we were building. I thought about the preservation order, protecting 2 years of surveillance footage. About the access logs that would show every visit. About the financial trail Patricia was following. About the 3-week timeline Thomas had laid out. 3 weeks to gather everything, to build the case so thoroughly that there would be no defense, no negotiation, no mercy. 2 weeks left. Jessica shifted in her sleep, murmuring something unintelligible. I watched her in the darkness, this woman I'd loved for 13 years and felt absolutely nothing. Just cold, crystalline clarity. And the absolute certainty that when this ended, she would lose everything. The call came during Emma's piano recital. I'd been sitting in the third row of the community center auditorium, watching my daughter's small fingers move across the keys with surprising confidence, when my phone vibrated. Thomas Whitaker's name appeared on the screen. I'd specifically told him to contact me only if Patricia found something that couldn't wait. I slipped out the side door into the hallway, Jessica's questioning glance following me. She'd been sitting 2 seats away, close enough to maintain appearances, far enough that I didn't have to smell her perfume. "Talk to me," I said quietly. "We need to meet. Tonight." Thomas's voice carried an edge I hadn't heard before. "Patricia found the other account." My pulse quickened. "What other account?" "Not over the phone. How soon can you get downtown?" I checked my watch. 6:45. The recital would run another hour, followed by the obligatory reception with cookies and punch. 2 hours. My office. I'll be waiting. I returned to my seat just as Emma finished her piece, something by Mozart that she'd been practicing for weeks. I applauded with everyone else, caught her smile from the stage, and felt the familiar twist in my chest. Whatever Patricia had found, whatever came next, I was doing this for them. Jessica leaned toward me. "Everything okay?" "Client emergency," I said. "I'll need to head downtown after this." She nodded, already turning her attention back to the stage where the next student was settling onto the bench. 2 weeks ago, she would have asked follow-up questions, maybe complained about another late night. Now she just accepted it, probably relieved to have me out of the house for whatever plans she'd made. I sat through the remaining performances without hearing a single note. Thomas's office was dark except for the conference room, where he and Patricia Brennan sat surrounded by documents and laptop screens. Patricia looked exactly like her background suggested. Mid-50s, steel gray hair pulled back severely, reading glasses on a chain around her neck, and the kind of sharp-eyed focus that came from 2 decades of hunting financial criminals. "Ryan," Thomas gestured to a chair. "Sit down." Patricia didn't waste time on pleasantries. "Your business partner is significantly more sophisticated than we initially assessed." She turned her laptop toward me. "We found the money trail from the settlement to Patterson Holdings LLC. That was intentionally visible, sloppy enough to discover, clean enough to explain as a legitimate business expense if questioned." "But," I prompted, "but it's a shell. Patterson Holdings exists primarily to lease that apartment and create a paper trail that looks like a real estate investment." She pulled up a series of bank statements. "The actual money, the bulk of it, went somewhere else entirely." Thomas leaned forward. "Tell him about the transfers." Patricia's fingers flew across the keyboard. 3 days after Kyle received his share of the Baxter medical settlement, he transferred $85,000 to Patterson Holdings. We knew that. What we didn't know was that 5 days later, Patterson Holdings transferred $65,000 to a company called Riverside Development Partners. What's Riverside Development Partners? On paper, a Delaware LLC involved in commercial real estate acquisitions. In reality, Patricia's smile was cold. It's a partnership between Kyle Patterson and Jessica Mitchell. The words took a moment to register. Jessica is his business partner? 50-50 ownership, established September 2022, the same month the apartment lease began. Patricia pulled up incorporation documents. She's listed as J. Mitchell, but the registered address is your home address. Her social security number is on file with the state of Delaware. I stared at the documents, my mind racing through implications. What did they do with $65,000? That's where it gets interesting. Patricia opened another file. Riverside Development Partners made a down payment on a property in Asheville, North Carolina, a cabin on 2 acres purchased for $320,000. They put down 20%, $64,000, and financed the rest through a mortgage in the company's name. Thomas slid a printed photograph across the table. A rustic cabin surrounded by trees, mountain views visible in the background. They've been building a nest together, Ryan. This isn't just an affair. They've been planning an exit strategy. I picked up the photograph, studying the details. Large windows, wraparound porch, detached garage. The kind of place you bought when you were thinking long-term. The mortgage payments, I said slowly. Where are those coming from? Patterson Holdings pays them monthly, $800 a month for the past 24 months. Patricia highlighted a series of transactions. Kyle's been funding their future with money that should have been split with you. The ice in my chest spread outward. Kyle hadn't just been sleeping with my wife. He'd been systematically diverting partnership assets to build a life with her. Every month for 2 years, while I'd been working late on cases, strategizing with him on client development, trusting him with our firm's finances, he'd been stealing from me to fund their escape plan. Can we prove the money came from partnership assets? I asked. Thomas and Patricia exchanged glances. That's the beautiful part, Thomas said. The Baxter medical settlement was a joint case. You both worked it. Both deserved equal shares. But Kyle structured the payment so it went entirely to him, then claimed he'd advance your share later for tax purposes. I remember that. The conversation came back to me. Kyle explaining something about quarterly distributions and tax optimization. I'd been buried in another case and had trusted his judgment. He said it made more sense for cash flow management. He lied. Patricia's voice was flat. There was no tax advantage. He wanted control of the full amount so he could move it without your knowledge. Your share of that settlement, $85,000, never made it to you. He used it to fund Patterson Holdings, which funded Riverside Development Partners, which bought the cabin. I set down the photograph carefully. So he stole from me to buy a love nest with my wife. Essentially, yes. Thomas pulled out a legal pad covered in notes. But it's actually better than that for our purposes. Because Jessica is a 50% owner of Riverside Development Partners, she has a direct financial interest in property purchased with stolen partnership assets. That makes her complicit in the theft. Can we unwind it? I asked. Patricia nodded. The cabin is a marital asset regardless of how it's titled. In a divorce, you're entitled to half its value. But because it was purchased with funds that Kyle misappropriated from the partnership, you also have a claim against him for the full $85,000 plus interest and damages. And because Jessica knowingly participated in the scheme, Thomas continued, she can't claim innocent spouse protection. Every dollar she received, every benefit she gained from that property, is traceable to funds that were stolen from you. I sat back, processing the implications. They thought they were being clever. They were clever, Patricia corrected. Delaware LLC's layered ownership, real estate in another state. This was sophisticated planning. If you hadn't found that parking pass, if we hadn't started digging, they might have gotten away with it. How much are we talking about total? Patricia consulted her spreadsheet. The cabin has appreciated. Current market value is approximately $380,000. The mortgage balance is $248,000, which means there's $132,000 in equity. Patterson Holdings has paid out $43,200 in mortgage payments over 2 years. Add in the original $85,000 from the settlement, and we're looking at total damages exceeding $128,000, not including legal fees, interest, and punitive damages. Thomas tapped his pen against the legal pad. Here's what I'm proposing. We file for divorce as planned, but we simultaneously file a civil suit against Kyle for breach of fiduciary duty, theft of partnership assets, and fraud. We name Jessica as a co-defendant in the civil suit based on her ownership stake in Riverside Development Partners. Will that hold up? Patricia's documentation is airtight. We have bank records, incorporation documents, property records, mortgage statements, everything traceable back to the original misappropriation. Thomas's smile was predatory. And because this involves theft of partnership assets, we can freeze all of Kyle's accounts pending resolution of the civil suit. I thought about Kyle sitting in our office, probably right now working late on a brief, completely unaware that his entire financial life was about to implode. When? We're ready to file whenever you give the word. Thomas pulled out a thick folder. Divorce petition, partnership dissolution, civil complaint. Everything's drafted and ready to go. We just need your signature. I looked at the documents, then at the photograph of the cabin. 24 months of planning. Nearly 200 visits to that apartment. $85,000 of my money. And through it all, Jessica had smiled at me over breakfast, kissed me goodbye, asked about my day, attended our daughter's school events, all while building a future with someone else. Do it, I said. File everything tomorrow morning. Thomas nodded. You understand what this means? Once we file, there's no going back. This becomes public, messy, and potentially very ugly. They made it ugly when they decided to steal from me. I stood up, straightening my jacket. I want them served simultaneously. Jessica at home, Kyle at the office. I want them to know in the same moment that everything they built is coming down. Patricia began gathering documents. I'll have the complete financial analysis ready for discovery. Every transaction, every transfer, every lie documented and cross-referenced. One more thing, I said. The cabin. Can we put a lien on it? Thomas made a note. Consider it done. As of tomorrow morning, they won't be able to sell, refinance, or transfer that property without satisfying your claims first. I shook hands with both of them and headed for the elevator. My phone showed 3 missed calls from Jessica, probably wondering where I was. I'd tell her I got tied up with a client issue, apologize for missing the post-recital reception, and ask about Emma's performance. And tomorrow morning, while she was drinking her coffee and checking her phone, a process server would knock on our door and hand her papers that would destroy everything she'd been planning for 2 years. The elevator doors closed, and I caught my reflection in the polished steel. I looked the same as always, tired, professional, unremarkable. But something had shifted behind my eyes. They'd underestimated me. Mistaken patience for weakness, strategic thinking for obliviousness. Tomorrow, they'd learn the difference. The morning air had that crisp bite that comes with late October in Atlanta. I sat in my car across from Kyle's building downtown, watching the entrance through my rearview mirror. 7:45. He'd arrive any minute now. Kyle was nothing if not punctual. My phone buzzed. Thomas. Process server is in position at your house. Jessica should be getting her wake-up call in approximately 15 minutes. Good, I said. The word came out flat, emotionless. And you're certain you want to be there when Kyle gets served? You don't need to witness this part, Ryan. I'm certain. I'd thought about this moment for 2 weeks, played it out 1,000 different ways in my mind while I sat across from Jessica at dinner, while I helped Sophie with her math homework, while I lay in bed listening to my wife's breathing and wondering if she was really asleep or just pretending while she texted him. Kyle's silver BMW pulled into the garage entrance at 7:52. I waited 3 minutes, then followed him inside. The elevator ride to the 14th floor felt longer than it should have. The building directory showed Patterson Holdings LLC in Suite 1420, the same entity that leased the apartment where he'd been screwing my wife for 2 years. I found him in his office, jacket off, coffee steaming on his desk. He was reading something on his computer screen, completely absorbed. For a moment, I just stood in the doorway watching him. This man had been at my wedding, had held Emma when she was 2 days old, had celebrated every major case win with me for the past 8 years. Ryan. He looked up, surprised but smiling. Didn't expect you this early. Everything okay? Actually, I need to talk to you about something. His smile faltered slightly. Maybe he heard something in my voice. Sure, of course, come in, sit down. I remained standing. I've been going through the partnership financials, the Meridian Tech settlement specifically. The color drained from his face so quickly I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. What about it? His voice had gone careful, measured. The Delaware LLC you formed, Riverside Development Partners. Interesting name considering you've been meeting my wife at the Riverside Inn. He stood up slowly. Ryan, listen. Sit down, Kyle. Something in my tone made him comply. His hands were shaking. I know about the apartment at Executive Plaza. I know about the cabin in Asheville. I know you stole $85,000 from me to fund your little love nest. I kept my voice level, conversational almost. What I'm curious about is how long you thought you could keep it going. It wasn't supposed to. He stopped, swallowed hard. How long have you known? Long enough? The door to his office opened. A woman in a gray suit stepped inside, holding a manila envelope. Kyle Patterson? He looked at her, confused. Yes? You've been served. She handed him the envelope and walked out. Kyle stared at the envelope like it might explode. His fingers fumbled with the seal. I watched his eyes move across the first page, then the second. His face went from white to gray to a sickly green. You're suing me? You're dissolving the partnership? You stole from me. You've been sleeping with my wife in an apartment you paid for with my money. What exactly did you think would happen? Ryan, please, we can work this out. Open to page 7. He flipped through with shaking hands. Found the section detailing the preservation order, the access logs, the surveillance footage from Executive Plaza showing him and Jessica entering and leaving apartment 4C nearly 200 times over 2 years. We have everything, Kyle. Every hotel receipt, every text message, every financial transaction. Patricia Brennan spent 2 weeks building a case that's going to destroy you. Patricia Brennan? Jesus Christ, Ryan, she's former FBI, yes. Turns out she's very thorough. He slumped back in his chair. What do you want? I want you to understand something. I leaned forward, hands on his desk. You didn't just sleep with my wife. You stole from me. You lied to me every single day for 2 years. You looked me in the eye at partnership meetings while you were planning your next afternoon with Jessica. It wasn't like that. Don't. The word came out sharp. I don't want to hear about how it just happened or how you fell in love or any other bullshit rationalization. You made choices. Both of you. Now you get to live with the consequences. My phone buzzed. A text from Thomas. Package delivered at home. Jessica is hysterical, demanding to speak with you. I showed Kyle the screen. She's getting served right now. Same documents, same evidence. By this afternoon, both your accounts will be frozen pending the fraud investigation. You can't do this. The firm will be dissolved. I've already retained separate counsel for the business litigation. You'll get your share of the legitimate assets after my $85,000 is returned with interest and damages. He looked up at me, and I saw something break behind his eyes. I loved her, Ryan. I really did. You don't get to tell me that. You don't get to make this about love. I straightened up. My daughters are going to grow up knowing their mother chose this. Chose you. Chose to blow up their family for Tuesday and Thursday afternoons in a rented apartment. Emma and Sophie, God, Ryan, they don't need to know. They'll know enough. Not the details, but enough to understand why their mother doesn't live with them anymore. You're going for custody? Full custody. Jessica can have supervised visitation until she proves she's stable. Given that she's been lying to everyone for 2 years and stealing marital assets, I don't think that's going to be difficult to obtain. Kyle's phone started ringing. He glanced at the screen. Jessica's name lit up. He looked at me, uncertain. Go ahead, I said. Answer it. He picked up. Jess? Even from across the desk, I could hear her screaming. Incoherent, panicked, furious. Kyle held the phone away from his ear. He knows, Kyle said quietly. He knows everything. More screaming. Then, how? How does he know? The parking pass, I said, loud enough for her to hear. You left it in the glove compartment. 2 years' worth of access to Executive Plaza. Did you really think I wouldn't check? The screaming stopped. Silence on the other end of the line. Jessica, Kyle said, I'm here. Her voice had gone small, frightened. Ryan, please, we need to talk about this. No, we don't. Talk to your attorney. I'm sure you'll be retaining one very soon. The girls are at school where they're going to stay until 3:15 like every other Wednesday. Then I'm picking them up and taking them home. You'll be gone by then. You can't kick me out of my own house. It's not your house anymore. Read page 12 of the petition. Exclusive use and possession granted to me pending final division of assets. You have until 5 p.m. to remove your personal belongings. Anything left after that will be placed in storage at your expense. Kyle had his head in his hands now. Jessica was crying on the phone, great heaving sobs. I felt nothing. One more thing, I said. The Asheville cabin? The one you bought with my money? Patricia found the property records. Found the mortgage application where you both lied about your marital status. That's mortgage fraud, by the way. Federal offense. Oh God, Jessica whispered. Thomas is filing a separate motion to seize the property as stolen marital assets. You'll probably want to mention that to your attorney too. I turned to leave, then stopped at the door. We were friends, Kyle. Real friends. I trusted you with everything. My business, my family, my life. And you decided all of that was worth less than sleeping with my wife. Ryan, I'm sorry. No, you're not. You're sorry you got caught. There's a difference. I walked out of his office, past the confused receptionist, into the elevator. My hands were steady. My breathing was calm. I'd expected to feel something. Rage, satisfaction, vindication. Something. Instead, there was just that same cold clarity I'd felt 2 weeks ago at 2:47 a.m. when Jessica's iPad had lit up the darkness. My phone rang as I reached the parking garage. Thomas. Both parties have been served. Jessica's already calling around for attorneys. She tried Deborah Klein first. And? Deborah won't touch it. Conflict of interest. She's represented you before on the Ashford patent case. Jessica's on her 4th call now. Good luck to whoever takes it. The evidence is airtight. Ryan, Thomas paused. How are you holding up? I climbed into my car, started the engine. I'm fine. You just blew up your marriage and your business partnership in the same morning. It's okay to not be fine. I'll be fine once this is over. Once Emma and Sophie are safe and Jessica is out of my house. Fair enough. I'll call you this afternoon with updates. And Ryan, you did the right thing. I ended the call and sat there for a moment, engine idling. Somewhere across town, Jessica was packing her things, her perfect life collapsing around her. Kyle was probably calling his own attorney, realizing just how badly he'd miscalculated. And I was going to pick up my daughters from school and take them home and figure out how to explain that mommy was going to be living somewhere else for a while. I pulled out of the parking garage into the bright October morning. The day stretched ahead of me, full of lawyers and phone calls and difficult conversations. But for the first time in 2 years, everything was finally out in the open. No more lies. No more secrets. Just consequences. The price of deception. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected. 6 months of litigation, depositions, and discovery had all led to this. A wood-paneled room in the Fulton County Courthouse, fluorescent lights humming overhead, and Judge Patricia Adams reviewing the settlement agreement one final time. Jessica sat 3 tables away with her 4th attorney. The first 3 had withdrawn after seeing the evidence. She looked smaller somehow, diminished. Her hair was different, shorter. The designer clothes had been replaced with something off the rack from Macy's. She wouldn't meet my eyes. Kyle wasn't present. His case had settled 2 months earlier. He'd signed over his entire partnership stake for $1, returned the misappropriated funds with interest, and agreed to a 10-year ban from practicing patent law in Georgia. The last I'd heard, he was working as a contract attorney for a document review company in Charlotte. The Asheville cabin had been seized and sold. The proceeds split between my settlement and the IRS penalties for the mortgage fraud. Judge Adams looked up from the documents. "Mr. Mitchell, you're certain about these terms?" Thomas nodded for me to respond. "Yes, Your Honor." Mrs. Mitchell receives no alimony, limited supervised visitation with the minor children, and 15% of the marital assets after Mr. Mitchell's claims are satisfied. That leaves her with approximately $48,000 from a marriage that lasted 12 years. "Those are the terms we've agreed to, Your Honor," Jessica's attorney said quietly. The woman looked exhausted. I didn't blame her. "Very well." The judge signed the final decree. "This marriage is hereby dissolved. Custody of Emma and Sophie Mitchell is awarded to their father, with Mrs. Mitchell granted supervised visitation every other Sunday from 1 to 5 p.m., pending completion of court-ordered counseling. Division of assets as outlined in the settlement agreement is approved and final." The gavel came down. It was over. Jessica tried to approach me in the hallway outside the courtroom. Thomas stepped between us smoothly. "Mrs. Mitchell, all communication goes through counsel. You know this." "I just want to talk to him. Please. 5 minutes." I looked at her for the first time since we'd entered the courthouse. Her eyes were red-rimmed, desperate. Part of me, a very small part, felt something that might have been pity. The rest of me remembered 200 visits to Executive Plaza, $85,000 stolen, 2 years of lies told to my face. "You had 2 years to talk to me," I said. "You chose to spend that time with Kyle instead." "I made a mistake, I know that. But Emma and Sophie, they need their mother." "They have a mother. You're just not living up to the job description." I turned to Thomas. "We're done here." We walked away. Behind me, I heard her start to cry. I didn't look back. The girls adjusted better than I'd feared. Children are resilient in ways adults forget. We'd told them together, Jessica and I, in one final coordinated effort, that we were getting divorced. That mommy had made some choices that hurt our family. That they'd still see her, but they'd be living with me. Emma, at 10, understood more than she let on. I'd caught her Googling, "Why do parents get divorced?" on her iPad one night. We'd had a long talk about trust and honesty and how sometimes grown-ups make mistakes that can't be fixed. Sophie, at 8, mostly wanted to know if she could still have her birthday party at the trampoline park. They saw Jessica every other Sunday. The first few visits were supervised by a court-appointed monitor at a family center downtown. Jessica would bring coloring books and board games and try desperately to make 4 hours feel normal. The girls were polite but distant, like they were visiting a relative they barely knew. After 3 months, the supervision requirement was lifted. Jessica could take them to lunch, to the park, to a movie, but they always came home to me. Their rooms were at my house, their friends, their school, their life, all of it centered around the home I'd kept. Jessica moved into a one-bedroom apartment in Marietta. She'd gotten a job at a design firm, entry-level work that paid a fraction of what she'd made running her own business. Most of her old clients had disappeared when the divorce became public knowledge. Turns out people don't want to hire someone whose personal life became a cautionary tale. The law firm took 6 months to dissolve completely. I kept the name, the client list, and the office space. Kyle's share, after subtracting what he'd stolen, legal fees, and damages, amounted to almost nothing. He'd walked away with his law license barely intact and a reputation that ensured he'd never work in patent law again. I hired 2 new associates and a senior partner who specialized in trademark litigation. The firm was smaller than it had been, but cleaner. No more wondering if my partner was stealing from me. No more watching my back. 1 year after the divorce was finalized, I took the girls to the mountains for a weekend. Not Asheville. I'd never go back there. We went to Gatlinburg instead, stayed in a cabin that looked nothing like the one Jessica and Kyle had bought with my money. We hiked, played board games, and roasted marshmallows over a fire pit. Sophie fell asleep against my shoulder watching a movie. Emma asked me if I was ever going to date anyone. Maybe someday, I told her. When I'm ready. Mom has a boyfriend, she said quietly. She didn't say so, but I saw her texting someone. She smiled the same way she used to smile at her phone before. I looked at my daughter, this perceptive 10-year-old who'd been forced to grow up too fast. How do you feel about that? She shrugged. I don't know. Weird, I guess. Like she gets to just start over and pretend nothing happened. She's not pretending, sweetheart. She knows what she did. She has to live with those choices every day. Do you still love her? The question caught me off guard. I thought about it carefully before answering. I love who I thought she was. But that person either never existed or stopped existing a long time ago. What I feel now is nothing. And that's okay. Emma nodded like she understood. Maybe she did. 2 years after the divorce, I ran into Kyle at a coffee shop downtown. He was waiting for his order, didn't see me until I was standing next to him. Ryan. His voice cracked slightly. I didn't know you came here. I don't usually. I'd only stopped in because my regular place was closed for renovations. We stood there in awkward silence while the barista called out orders. Kyle had aged badly. Gray at the temples, lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. He looked like a man carrying weight he couldn't put down. How are the girls? He asked finally. They're good. Emma's in middle school now. Sophie's playing soccer. He nodded. That's good. I'm glad they're doing well. Kyle. I kept my voice neutral. We're not going to be friends again. We're not going to have coffee and catch up. If you see me somewhere, you can nod and keep walking. That's all the relationship we have left. I know. I wanted you to know I'm sorry. Really sorry. Not because I got caught, but because I hurt you. You were my best friend and I destroyed that. I looked at him for a long moment. Saw the regret there, genuine and painful. It didn't change anything. The thing about sorry, I said, is that it doesn't rebuild what you broke. It doesn't give me back the 2 years you stole. It doesn't erase my daughter's asking why mommy doesn't live with us anymore. I know. So you're sorry. Okay, I heard you. But it doesn't mean we're square. It doesn't mean you're forgiven. It just means you feel bad about what you did. That's your burden to carry, not mine. The barista called my name. I grabbed my coffee and walked out without looking back. 3 years after the divorce, Jessica requested a modification to the custody arrangement. She wanted overnight visits. Her attorney argued that she'd completed her counseling, maintained steady employment, and demonstrated stability. Thomas and I reviewed her petition in his office. "She's technically entitled to request this," he said. "The girls are older now. The court might grant it." "What do Emma and Sophie want?" "That's the question the judge will ask them." The hearing was scheduled for a Thursday afternoon. Emma was 13 now, old enough to speak directly to the judge. Sophie, at 11, would be interviewed by a guardian ad litem. I didn't coach them, didn't tell them what to say, just asked them to be honest about what they wanted. Emma told the judge she was willing to try overnight visits, but she wanted them at our house, not Jessica's apartment. "It's where we live," she explained. "It's where our stuff is. Mom could stay in the guest room." Sophie told the guardian ad litem that she loved her mom, but she didn't want to sleep anywhere except her own bed. The judge modified the order to allow Jessica extended day visits, 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. on Saturdays. No overnights. Jessica cried when the ruling was read. I felt that same emptiness I'd felt in the courtroom 3 years earlier. The girls were choosing me. Not because I'd poisoned them against their mother, but because Jessica had broken their trust in ways that couldn't be fixed with supervised visits and court-ordered therapy. Actions had consequences, even for mothers. 5 years after the divorce, I sold the house. Too many memories, too many ghosts. The girls and I moved to a newer development in Alpharetta, closer to Emma's high school. Sophie got to design her own room. Emma wanted a space for her art studio. Jessica came to see the new place once, dropping the girls off after a Saturday visit. She stood in the foyer looking around at the open floor plan, the modern kitchen, the life we'd built without her. "It's nice," she said quietly. "Really nice. The girls love it." She nodded, eyes distant. "Ryan, can I ask you something?" "Depends on the question." "Do you think, if I'd just talked to you 5 years ago, told you I was unhappy, asked for counseling, do you think we could have fixed it?" I thought about the question carefully. Maybe. If you'd come to me before you started sleeping with Kyle, before you stole from me, before you built a whole separate life and lied to my face for 2 years. I paused. "But you didn't do any of that. You made different choices." "I know. I just wonder sometimes what would have happened if... Jessica." I kept my voice gentle but firm. "There's no point in wondering. You can't undo what you did. You can only live with it." She left a few minutes later. Through the window, I watched her sit in her car for a long time before driving away. 7 years after the divorce, Emma graduated high school. She'd been accepted to Georgia Tech for engineering, my alma mater, though she'd chosen it independently. The graduation ceremony was outdoors on a perfect May afternoon. Jessica sat 3 rows behind me. We'd worked out the arrangement through the girls. I'd sit with my parents and sister. Jessica would sit with her mother. Everyone would be polite and civil for Emma's sake. When Emma's name was called, I stood and cheered. So did Jessica. Our daughter walked across that stage with her head high, accepting her diploma and her honors cords, and I felt pride so fierce it almost hurt. Afterward, we took pictures. Separate pictures. Emma with me and my family, then Emma with Jessica and her grandmother. Emma didn't ask for a picture of all of us together. She understood that some things couldn't be forced. At the reception, Emma pulled me aside. "Dad, I want you to know something." "What's that, sweetheart?" "I know what Mom did. I've known for a while now. Sophie told me some of it, and I figured out the rest." She looked at me with eyes that were far too knowing for 17. "And I want you to know that I don't blame you for how things turned out. You protected us. You gave us stability. You were the parent who showed up every single day." My throat tightened. "You didn't need to say that." Yeah, I did. Because you never said anything bad about Mom, even when you could have. You let us figure it out on our own. That took strength. I hugged my daughter, this brilliant young woman who was heading off to college in 3 months, and felt something shift. Not forgiveness. I'd never forgive Jessica for what she'd done. But maybe something like peace. The past couldn't be changed. The betrayal couldn't be undone. But standing there at my daughter's graduation, surrounded by family and friends and the life I'd rebuilt from the wreckage, I realized something important. I'd won. Not because Jessica had lost everything, though she had. Not because Kyle's career was destroyed, though it was. Not even because I'd gotten the house and the business and primary custody. I'd won because my daughters were thriving. Because they knew they could count on me. Because when everything fell apart, I'd been the one who held steady. Jessica had gambled our family on an affair with my business partner. She'd stolen, lied, and betrayed every promise she'd made. And in the end, she'd lost the only things that actually mattered. The trust of her children and the life we'd built together. The money, the house, the business, those were just scorekeeping. The real victory was watching Emma walk across that stage, knowing she'd grown into a strong, intelligent young woman despite her mother's choices. That was the price of deception. Not the legal fees or the divided assets or the supervised visitation. The real price was measured in moments like these, graduations and soccer games and quiet evenings at home, that Jessica had forfeited when she chose Tuesday and Thursday afternoons at Executive Plaza over her family. 10 years after the divorce, I sat in my office looking at a photograph on my desk. Emma at her college graduation, Sophie finishing high school, both of them smiling and healthy and whole. They'd survived their mother's betrayal. More than survived, they'd flourished. Jessica was still in their lives, but at the margins. A voice on the phone, an occasional lunch, a card on birthdays. She'd remarried, not Kyle, someone else she'd met through work. The girls were polite to him but distant. I'd dated occasionally over the years, but nothing serious. Maybe someday I'd trust someone enough to try again. Or maybe I wouldn't. Either way, I was content. The firm was thriving. We'd expanded to a second office in Charlotte, hired 6 more associates. The Tech Vision settlement that Kyle had stolen from me seemed like ancient history now, though the money he'd repaid had funded Emma's entire college education. My phone buzzed. Sophie, texting from her college campus. Dad, remember that internship I applied for? I got it. I smiled and typed back, "That's my girl. Proud of you." 3 words, simple and true. The same words I'd said to both my daughters 1,000 times over the past 10 years. The words their mother had forfeited the right to say when she'd chosen deception over honesty. I thought about that night 10 years ago, staring at Jessica's iPad in the darkness, reading messages that would destroy my marriage. If I could go back and change it, make it so she'd never had the affair, never met Kyle at that apartment, never stolen from me, would I? The answer surprised me. No. Because that betrayal had revealed who Jessica really was beneath the surface. It had shown me what she valued and what she was willing to sacrifice. And it had given me the chance to show my daughters what integrity looked like, what it meant to stand firm when everything collapsed. I'd lost a wife and a business partner that night, but I'd gained something more valuable. Absolute clarity about who I was and what I stood for. I'd learned that I could survive betrayal without becoming bitter, that I could be strategic without being cruel, that I could win without losing myself. Jessica had taught me that lesson, though not in the way she'd intended. She'd wanted excitement, passion, something I supposedly couldn't provide. She'd found it in hotel rooms and rented apartments and stolen money. And in pursuing those things, she'd lost everything that actually mattered. That was the real lesson, the one I hoped my daughters had learned. That character isn't tested when things are easy. It's tested when you're tempted to take shortcuts, to lie, to betray the people who trust you. And the choices you make in those moments define who you really are. Jessica had made her choices. She'd chosen deception, and she'd paid the price. I'd made different choices. I'd chosen documentation over confrontation, strategy over emotion, my daughter's welfare over revenge. And in the end, that made all the difference. The photograph on my desk smiled back at me. Two young women who knew their father would always tell them the truth, even when it hurt. Who understood that trust, once broken, could never be fully repaired. Who'd learned that actions have consequences, and sometimes those consequences last a lifetime. That was my victory. Not the courtroom win or the financial settlement or even the custody arrangement. My victory was knowing that when my daughters face their own moral test someday, they'd remember how their father handled his. They'd remember that he didn't cheat or lie or take shortcuts, that he built his case methodically, fought fairly within the system, and emerged with his integrity intact. That was worth more than any settlement could ever be. I closed the photo app on my phone and returned to work. Outside my window, Atlanta stretched out in the afternoon sun. A city full of people making choices, building lives, facing their own tests of character. Some would pass, some would fail. I'd passed mine. And that, in the end, was enough.